I want to talk to you about everything remote viewing, 5G.
So you were about to actually share what was going on behind the scenes and how they're actually having a discussion about politics, but going even deeper into the political agendas and how the agenda is unraveling even some of the galactic beings. Yes. And how we are already coexisting with that. But you were sharing a really interesting story about this, I believe you said 5-year-old that was having a lucid dream. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we were kind of going into a little bit of cycle. So okay. That was really interesting.
Okay. So I was listening to, off of your recommendation, mm-hmm. the Mel K show. Mm-hmm. And you had said, hey, here's something that my parents listen to. It's more about politics and that agenda. But you said, hey, this is one of the most closest, everything that's come out of her mouth, you've agreed with or heard, and what I like about her, and she brings it up a lot, especially in this episode where she was talking with this guy. I'll get his name and I'll put the mm-hmm. reference notes of Perfect. What episode and everything this was. But he was taking things more to an intergalactic, which we'll get into, or time is dimensional, interdimensional mm-hmm. beings that way, interdimensional time, portal, traveling, things like that. And then, yes, the frequencies of light mm-hmm. that people are experiencing. Mm-hmm. So as he was sharing these things with her, he was saying, look, I'm going to show you some slides. And there were some slides of some organizations that had started research in 1950s, or all of this research that we can find. I mean, they're trying to take it away.
Right.
But
Tesla,
all the truth has to be there somewhere, right? As they just kind of in the last month proved that to be the case when Klaus Schwab went to Antarctica and had some meetings there. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, Mark Zuckerberg had to come out and say, yeah, our fact checking is this. So we do know whatever Antarctica is. And by the way, on every podcast, everyone says Antarctica.
Why Antarctica?
Because we have no images yet. So in this podcast, they talked about how we're raising our vibration and able to see more dimension. That's always been there.
The Nordics. Perhaps.
Yes. Well, so that's a question. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I wake up. So this is how I started my story with Camille. I wake up a couple days ago. I reconnected with one of my friends from college, one of the sisters, and who isn't on social media for many reasons that we're not very interacted on it. But the other sister is, and I'd seen that she was really posting a lot of stuff about Joe Biden and things during during the campaign. And I thought that's interesting because these girls were in support of Joe Biden. He's nice. And I thought it was interesting because they were such a conservative political duo that were always making me do my critical thinking. I mean, one went to law school, one, and very religious in a very structured religion. But anyway, so she posts this, thing. So I'm thinking, wow, I wonder what the other sister is, or how this is acceptable. It's such a political family. So time goes on and I reconnect with the other sister and just recently, I mean, we talk about a lot of things and I tell her about this podcast, and perhaps one day, since she loves symbology and loves research and her attorney background, maybe she can proofread, whatever. Mm-hmm. So her other sister, I wake up a couple days ago to a post, and I wouldn't say, very structured. I mean, she's LDS. So there was no, I don't know, her spiritual take on things, but so that's why this post was a little odd. I woke up and read on Instagram and Facebook, her cute, darling daughter of age 4 or 5 had a very vivid, lucid dream. And she's like, so I told my daughter, hey, because I know she's really into her kids having their creativity, as all parents are. Mm-hmm. So she says, hey, write out your dream? She's like, yeah. So she wrote out her dream discussing the way to find these light beings called unicorns. And she said, you have to do this. You have to go out at sunset is when the energy is the strongest. Right. And so she's like, Mom, can we go and find these unicorns at sunset? So they take off and she posts all these pictures. So this is the part where I haven't told you.
Wow.
Photos of these light streams coming down. So it looks like it's coming through the clouds. It does look Nordic. I also on the same day read about how in, I think it's Galveston, Texas, no, Arcana, there was that fish falling from the sky. So where that phenomenon happens. But in the podcast with Mel K, he was talking about, when I was listening today, how everyone is reporting these light apparitions coming down, and they're getting in many car wrecks, and they're recording these things. And in some cases, in the past, the government's come out and said, just very recently, oh, that's Elon Musk, or our satellites were launching into the air. So here was the theory, because he's saying on one hand, we are all expected this false flag event where they might be projecting things into the air, and by the metal we've taken into our body, or the vaccine, or whatever it is, or this is a time where
the vaccine.
Yes, but he's like, you have to be careful which is which is a natural occurring
organic
thing, meaning because the planet is going through a remagnetism. So, and we are too.
Right.
And so we're being able to
Yep.
perhaps see things that we didn't before.
Yes.
So there's been more reportings of everything, interdimensional beings, meaning perhaps our old thinking, or what we've been thought by the movies is what I'm saying, programmed, is that things will come from another planet.
Right.
But what if there's all this talk lately? I mean, this is physics. If you listen to any science, that's
right.
correct. It's interdimensional, right? Just like time. And so that's the thing, is he went on to say, and why we started this podcast, they started going into the portals.
It's not our own theories, but also our own experiences.
Yes, our own experiences. And so, at that point, he was just like, do you know what I'm talking about? I mean, I'm really going into some things here. And she's like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she said, you bring up, which he did. He was talking about cloning of food, and how there's cloning of people. Even Britney Spears is in a cage. And her clone is out, I mean, as actors and actresses, we start putting two and two together of like, are these people for real? And why do they sound so programmed? So she talks about that. And she says, look, when I'm the person who goes and sees where the money trail is and where this money comes from, and she's like, all of them come from the same NGOs or 3-letter things, or CIA, or all of these things from the UN, and the NGOs that go into other countries. And she's like, and they all come by the same slide that you have on your screen. So she's like, absolutely. So, the reason why we wanted to do this podcast as well was we never heard the politics, the political, where, communist Chinese leader of the Communist Chinese Party is having turf wars with the cabal, which the elite families, the old families, mafia wars. And there's plenty of information out there on that. So, and there's plenty of podcasts and things bringing that. But we had often said, when are they going to bring in this overarching, where it's energy, it's intergalactic, it is interdimensional. So, and that's exactly what we said, the intergalactical, so the solar, the interdimensional. So there's beings that are going in and out of these portals. They might be second dimensional, not even as evolved as we are, but they have the telepathic communication, so they can put fear into your mind. And so the conversation naturally went to where it does with us often, the pineal gland.
Right.
So if all of this programming to take away our pineal gland and replace it with some artificial intelligent God that makes us feel good, this is so fucking 1984 George Orwell, but everything's been laid out before us. Now these podcasts are intermingling this language. And the only thing that I see, or these theories and putting them all together, right? Like on the Mel K show, if she's hosting him, and he's showing all the facts of people coming forth with these cases to prove his theory that things are out there. And in the end, he's like, you know, what's really sad is my plight to find all of this was health. That's why his pineal gland, and all of us that we've made this our plight, or heading towards the belief of God, including Mel K, you know, more political. But he's like, is to help people, right? From cancer and all these things that have been sick that they have had the technology for since the 50s. Right. Because with all of this portal technology and interdimensional things that they know, they can prove that they know there are interdimensional beings, and that they know how to use it, that's being kept from us, could be used, the frequencies, to eradicate cancer and things like that. And so it makes you angry, which we battle every day with being angry that we feel sick, tired, and miserable at times, emotionally or physically, coupled with the fact that how free we feel, because we know it is our right, our divine right, our divine, as long as we have that spark within us and that breath within us, and we're not cloned, and we have our own consciousness, that we have a right to learn all of this. So that's where I think you and I come in, is the how, because we have been experiencing travel. We have been experiencing connecting to interdimensional beings. And that's our hope. I mean, and as the vibration and things like, because he went into too, is with 5G and things like that, that this is absolutely, in order to program people, so you also have to bring the frequency and emit something. And, you know, so we're at the precipice of what they believe, with all the magnetic change of the planet, and the more reporting of interdimensional beings, because technology is getting better, cameras getting better, you know, people are filming things on the moon and seeing things like they couldn't, and because it's a time where they believe that, back to the false flag, they want to do this Holocaust or hologram image of aliens and things like that before the real aliens or interdimensional beings come and say, hey, we've been here, you guys are ready now to communicate. But as Mel K says, or I was listening on this podcast, there's always a big push of disinformation and to change the narrative, because as we've seen in many movies, which now we know movies are great records of things to come,
what's being revealed,
like in the Earth, or the I got to get my movie name straight, but The Earth Stood Still, it was with Keanu Reeves. And so remember, in there, they wanted to come, the premise was they weren't actually evil or malicious, but because of all the vibration of the planet, it ended up being a cluster, and that could potentially happen too. So our work here is to bring awareness, and then the solution. So but can you believe all of those things just in the last couple days are coming up just by mainstream? In the mainstream, these light things are coming down. And he said, I don't think that's a hologram, but there will be holograms. But this was the planet and things changing. We are seeing and feeling more than we ever have. And that's what you and I offline always talk about, is as much emotional attack that the grays or the government or whatever are emitting through the water, the frequencies that are making us emotionally feel, discomfort, and the dis-ease that they're trying to put into our body. We know and have the awareness, and there are many people out there sharing how to overcome these things. And I think that's the solution, and things that we can provide, you know, is doing the geometric. How can we access what they are? So as much as darkness as there can be, which with these portals, then there's these tunnels and these vortexes where these interdimensional beings are going in and out. They made the case, they started talking about how people that are suddenly disappearing are perhaps
traveling.
some of them are traveling. So we have talked about traveling for a long time, and we haven't really known how to share it, but
whether
everyone's traveling
Mayan
now.
Civilization,
Everyone's
the other lifted cities, what was this all about? Could have potentially have been travel, right? And we've even seen where NASA, well, we don't know why NASA would have any involvement in underground archaeology. Why would they be studying some of the portals that, when they are a system to be studying the cosmos, right? And all of this advanced technology, why are they interested in underground activity and artifacts and so forth, right? As well, because what do those have in common?
Yes.
Potentially, knowing how to be an advanced civilized nation. And I think you mentioned so many key words there: symbology, the pineal activation. I think the most important thing we can focus on is the decalcifying and activating the pineal gland, and ways that we can do that. So I think we should really get to that in this podcast. But also the farce with what's being revealed in movies, knowing that whenever we see these sci-fi films, or even, the one you recommended, or excuse me, referenced of The Earth Stood Still, we see that these are being storylines that are played out because it's not what is going to be revealed. It's what has already been revealed. It's what has already occurred. So we have to bear in mind that this technology has already been unleashed into society. It is already, you mentioned 1950. Perhaps when there was more mind control, right?
That's when and the FBI was more in charge of investigating, which was awesome. And then all of a sudden the CIA came in, and that's when the word conspiracy theorist was born from the CIA. I mean, everything that the FBI said, oh my gosh, here's what's happening. They came in, and so knowing that. And what I like is what happens between you and I as a friendship is helping each other surface our inner knowing, because the more questions we ask, and that's what her guest today said too, or whenever this was recorded a few days ago, he kept saying, just keep asking the questions why. And that's, you'll always get an answer that way. And so we've been able to help each other with our own experiences of this frequency changes, the solar flares, all of that. And to lead in, it all goes back to the pineal gland decalcification.
Right. That's why I really think that's going to be important. And also how this can help us with how to not become prey to the counterfeit system, how we can activate our own spiritual technology all through the pineal gland. And I looked up the word conspiracy, by the way, which we all know is a secret plan, right? A group to do something unlawful, but plotting or conspiring. But we use the term theory, right? Because they're just theories. So it's fine for us to go ahead and take a look at theories. But when the CIA is coining a specific term, because there's a dark operation that exists, the term conspiracy is really coming down to why is there a conspiracy? Why do we ask the questions? Why is there a conspiracy? Why is there a dark operation? If we can understand the agendas behind all of this, this is when we can actually get to other answers. You mentioned 1950, which is, I think, where we saw a lot of the Nazi war mind control, which really, I think, came from Chinese Sun Tzu, The Art of War, right? Knowing how to use intelligence to win a war, how to use the influence over the mind.
And then they took the psychology from the Germans, who they were steeped in it, from philosophy, and then Bernays brought it over 100 years ago, which every Melke Alvin will kind of say, hey, this started, we're the little bubble experiment, but we are also, so the why, yes, that agenda, but
Yes.
at the, and then they use the technology for their own purposes, and they keep it from us, but as we've experienced, we have it.
But we have to bear that in mind. That's probably what's most important.
Yes.
There is the natural hologram. Yes. There is the artificial, the counterfeit. We can see what they're trying to mimic because we know what is innate technology within us versus what is the technology that is being made to be cloned or counterfeits. Yeah. It's always the trick and illusory, right? But anytime we understand when a magician has his trick, when we learn the trick, we're no longer going to fall prey to knowing it's the awareness of the trick, knowing that we are being, so we are no longer being fooled. Yeah, we're no longer being manipulated by the mind. Now, maybe to certain extents. I mean, the program, but that's the part of waking up to like, wait a minute, why? Anyway, that's the coining phrase of you're waking up to how much you have been programmed. Once you start asking just little tiny questions like, why was school history different? I mean, there's so many avenues, like you and I say with the vaccines, the way you can get people to at least come into more awareness that perhaps they're not holistic and good for you is when you bring up metals in the body and you say, hey, if metals are magnets for inflammation and cancer and all disease and all these things start going wrong from inflammation, then why would we have so many ingredients that would cause that? Right. So, and there's plenty of information and we can go into any of it, but why the 5G, not only for surveillance, but also emission of frequency and blocking the pineal gland. Yes. And pineal gland. That is the one thing that everyone is talking about on podcasts now. So I think people are afraid to bring it up, but they're like, yeah, and that's the pineal. I mean, even you just hear it from anyway. So if we can talk about some of that, and I think that's the background, we have it we can do it through many modes, psychologically, through healing epigenetics, which we have podcasts on. Yes. Nutrition and psychology, energy, and then also doing the actual geometric movements to open the portals on you to receive. And, that's Qigong, that's meditation, that's getting into those states. And any of that is what you have to battle, I think, while decalcifying the pineal gland is the mind and showing up. It's no different. Is the chop wood carry water? I mean, I want to get into how to decalcify and all of that. Yes, right. But the first step is just saying we have to do. Hey, the intention is going to be work, and you're going to battle. Why am I doing this? Because have you been programmed since birth by people to find out how to align with your inner? I mean, how to get the breath and all this. I mean, more of these things are coming up, but none of us learn this in school. None of us learn nutrition. I think there's a lot here of you're going to just come up to how much do I submit to this idea and these ideas. But a lot of the technology that I study and that you've studied is 4,500 years old. And as long as civilization's been here and been taught to open, to do these movements, to do the meditation, the breath work, and now we have the healing, epigenetics, we have more terminology and things to that. It still is our ritual every day to choose this work over the programming. It is. I'm glad that you brought that up too, because with the ancient wisdom of these techniques and using these practices, there's a reason why it's been lost in modern civilization, because it's been the agenda to be infiltrated into the education system, to be infiltrated into big pharma, the medical system, legal system, and so forth. So we realize that is part of the societal programming too. That is part of us battling with, it's the terrain theory. If we've heard of the fishbowl theory. So we have the dirty bowl, right? The fish is getting sick because the bowl just needs to be cleaned, but they're murky and contaminated. However, we can continue to medicate the fish so that the fish can, I don't know, navigate through its murky waters and contaminated waters. We can vaccinate the fish. We can write a prescription for the fish. But if we just clean the water,
if we write,
we won't need water
these
filters. We won't need
anti-life,
food.
Anti-nature, and anti-life.
Pro-life, which is antibiotic.
Correct. Antipsychotic, antibiotic, anti-life.
Anti-anything.
We can do that, which is the mainstream narrative now. It didn't used to be. Or we can choose back to our ancient civilizations. And that's why supposedly, and this is also in these podcasts, these people are talking about why now, because they think there is a time and a shift in the planet. And they have to encase the narrative before the truth. And they have to block the pineal gland and your connection to God, divine, and those laws that we have, where if we don't consent, it is our free will to experience what we want on this planet, which is what always has been the spiritual plight for me studying all these things. Is I believe I always thought there was some element of, why do things look this way when I feel this way? And I think that's part of the mystery of life, is to find that. But we are at one of the times where, I guess, if you're awakening in the times of awakening the planet, where you are going to see, and they even talked about this in the podcast today. Look, if somebody wants to stay in the third dimension, then the vaccination, all of this, it's happening.
If we don't learn from historical events, are going to be doomed to repeat it. So we have to know what to do different this time. How do we unite together and awaken? And that's why I believe that the passivity is probably the biggest culprit. And, I've actually heard a lot of conversation or discussion this past week on those who are dissociating or in denial about, the global state and conditions of what's occurring right now. And I think primarily I validate and understand why, because so many individuals do not know how to get involved. What can they do? This seems way too overwhelming. So,
because politically, what's going on with the country is the middle class is waking up, realizing they're actually not free, because the middle class now are the ones who there was enough privilege. There was enough, but with vaccinations and all of these
warfares.
Truth,
agendas. Justice,
God, and country is trying to be put away for the new world order. Because a narrative, because the frequency and planet is shifting. There is a war. And it's which narrative can be manipulated yet again, because the middle class is waking up to, oh my gosh, Columbus, oh my gosh, Native Americans, what's the real story? What are these bathhouses in Europe, all over Europe, where they said during this time of year they built it in 1 year, when really these things were here through. There's so many cases where you're starting to be like,
it starts to come
is
together.
CNN brainwashing me? Rittenhouse trials. You're finding out they're lying. You're finding out that the lab in China was doing these other things too. If you take any story and go down it and find out you're being manipulated, then what? And I think that's where we're coming to right now, is the big narrative is going to be to fool everyone again, and to get them all, and they don't need humans, by the way, to do the movement that they need.
No.
But we
thus depopulation.
So I guess, it's just a part of it is just realizing a lot of people are going to stay where they want
in one of the narratives, which is fine.
And then they'll be completely mind
controlled. And I've had I have to make peace with that and content with it, because I realize there's always going to be another lifetime where they can, maybe awaken. Perhaps, right? And maybe there was a lifetime where I was in hypnosis, right? And there is that massive hypnosis.
I think that's part of the.
But I do think there is some good news here, because We know the controllers pulling the strings. We know the bioweapons, whether it's the, chemtrails, the heavy metal, the mercury is one of the biggest weapons, bioweapons, the inorganic mercury. Menthol mercury is a heavy metal and toxicity. If there's exposure, it's because it's in medications too, because they cross the blood-brain barrier. That is why mercury is such a heavy bioweapon. Elemental mercury is vaporous, so it's hence why it's mobile. When we look at the microfilaments from the chemtrails, they will study and see that they were elemental mercury levels, right? So, but what's important about that is because it can easily cross the blood-brain barrier, that is where it actually puts us into this docile state where we are in a controllable conformity, right? We don't use the critical thinking skills. Hence the prefrontal cortex, right, which is the awakened, alert, focused, conscious aspect of the mind. This is where the good news is. This is the good news. We don't have to be falling into this illusion of the world we're living in. We can see the division. We can clearly see, as you're talking about these two narratives, there's this illusion of what's occurring. And what I think is the best news is these who want to call themselves the ruling elite party because of bloodline, right? Because of the blood, right? It's what is, and this is kind of even proverbial, the elite blood, right?
Yeah.
They're not as powerful as we give them credit for, because they have to utilize technology they don't actually possess innately.
Correct. On that note, when we were initially going to do this podcast, we were going to do alchemy, and we're talking about alchemy right now. Mercury, and we will do a podcast on that, but sure. Mercurial, it goes both ways. It is a transformer of material. It is a messenger.
Right.
So when we look at, and this is the interesting part, when you're talking about the bloodlines and using the technology or magic, they are using alchemy as well. And it's in the mythology, in the Greek mythology, in the Norse gods. And one thing, when I wanted to do the podcast on alchemy, which we still will, but this kind of ties into it, is when you just said the good news is, so if we look at Mercury as a planet and it has its properties and how it rules and works with energies, that's one thing. If we look at Mercury as the actual amalgam and like you said, it's liquid, gaseous, what it does to turn a solid into something else, like from lead to gold. That whole process of alchemy, pulling in the salt, the sulfur, the different elements to make it to gold, the refining, the rectification, all of these things that if you look at basic alchemy, you could then turn it into, which many have through Carl Jung or different psychological alchemy. Okay. So there's that. And then the mythology. So if we're looking at Mercury or in the Norse gods or in the Roman or in the Greek, here's the thing that I wanted to talk about. The people that have their gifts and they know their one thing of magic, they only have that gift. Right. So they look scary, like Thor with his big hammer, or you study or Ragnar Lothbrok when, because I'm watching Vikings. So these stories, I mean, Ragnar and Thor are only good, and Odin, at what their gifts are. We as humans. So I didn't understand for a long time when I was studying Qigong or any of these theories and the gods, we're laughing at the gods. There's these movements to laugh at the gods. There's these things where you're like, hey, the gods are jealous of you. And I'm like, I don't really understand why a god would be jealous, because we have the potentiality of every god's gift. We have the potentiality of a human, of emotions, of free will. We don't have to consent. The gods can only do one thing. If it's their gift to fight, they're a fighter. If it's their gift to be a messenger and to change things, it might be mercurial. It might be on the cathode end or the anode end. It could be the scary end, the female end, the yin, the yang.
Can you elaborate a little bit on some of what those, the definition of some of those terms?
Yeah.
Like cathode.
Well, so we should go,
because I want the root words are really where they're symbolic, right? When we suddenly study the anagrams of words, when we understand, the root word, we realize this is where a lot of the spelling has a lot of the symbolism, what came from light language, what moved into dark language, and so forth.
And so there, that talk right there, light language. So here's what I found, and we can spin off into the terminology, because a lot of these religions specifically use, so like cathedral is a place where people go to charge, and I should get this more specific, but these root words, basically, if we're using these, when we wanted to do the alchemy podcast, we want to talk about intentions and how we alchemize, literally, physically, all of that. And so looking at the alchemical process, and there is a way that it goes from one polarity to the other, one pole to the other.
Right.
So all of this, everything that you said, is how we can create to our true potential if we understand the languaging. So if we've been duped with different languaging and programming, then this is going to be a discovery of not just this podcast, but more, because what are the languages, the symbols? And frankly, you can find them all in fairy tales, in mythology. You will see the alchemical process of how something starts off as one thing, and then mercury and sulfur and salt, and they're all representative to the planets. Gold is God. I mean, gold is the sun and God.
Solar God.
But you need the alchemical process, and then lo and behold, that's the same process we go through with our souls. Like there's going to be a word, sulfation, that happens in alchemy, where it is a process where you're turning something and you're refining the soul. And so how did we come with salvation? So you see some of these words are similar that perhaps religions took on,
and we have to look at
the languaging intention, and so that's,
and different languages too. We can look at the Latin or the Greek, and there's going to be different alterations to that.
And Sanskrit. I mean, if you want to use a language of love, use the Latin, right? There's so many words for love, but the language, the language of light,
Sanskrit, Hebrew are very pure languages.
And I've studied some Sanskrit just because of the yoga studies and things, and there is no better word than the Sanskrit language. Just like if you know a Latin-based language like Spanish, you can't convey your emotions in English once you know Spanish. So
we have the mantras.
So we have the mantras and the intention. If we can use, other religions are using it. Governments are using this. Everyone's using alchemy. Everyone's using magic. And what's magic?
Almost any specialized group that is practicing these rituals can be termed as cults, right? But cults don't necessarily have to have, it's really that there's a connotation. It's really the context we're using in cult, because the cults are what are going to make up our specific culture too, because it's the religion, the religious politics that are being played within that particular society, right? So if we identify with mantras, for instance, or even intentions or affirmations, we can really, it'll take us back to first there was the word, right? And our word is our creative power. So if we're working with our higher intelligence, we can even tap into our superconscious, which really is the prefrontal cortex going into our pineal, in infinite intelligence, right? When we're really operating from that particular state of mind, we're focusing a directed, guided intention, right?
Correct.
Which
directed which is
Directing
directed.
an
That's going to
energy,
be an
directed
outcome.
focus.
That's the
Yeah.
male direct line is the male.
The masculine
is the
yeah.
alchemical piece that's
Yep.
direct. And
Right.
then the more
feeling,
gaseous
fluid,
and changing and feeling
mutable
is the feminine.
Right. And we can even look at that even in terms of the right brain, left brain hemisphere.
Correct.
Right. Because that is where so we'll use terms like brain instead of mind or total mindful, because the whole mind is what makes up our right, left brain. We're not ever using just one side of our brain.
Correct.
We have to think and feel at the same time.
Correct.
At all times. So we're using total mindfulness. When we're using terms of brain, we're really just talking specific anatomy, right?
Yeah.
So with the left brain being the logical, analytical mind, which we need thought and logic, that is the masculine hemisphere, right? And then we have the feeling and emotional mind, which gives passion, which gives feeling to our thought, is the feminine mind.
Yeah.
So we marry the two, masculine and feminine, and we established a full wholeness of our masculine and feminine nature, the yin and yang nature.
And then we are balanced vibrationally, frequency between mind, body, spirit.
Yes.
And that's when we can overcome some of this vibrational programming.
Low density and when we're using which is the heart brain coherence, right? When we're using the alchemy of the thought and feeling, both combined, that is when we are actually transmuting these lower conditions that you're discussing. So we can get into this a little bit more, but you asked, where is this derived from, right? So we can look at pagan religions, right? Nothing wrong with pagan, because they really do use sacred symbology and sacred geometry. And it was derived from the French term as magique, which is magic, otherwise known in modern terms as affirmation, that was used in these pagan religions. Anyway, commonly associated with pagans of dark magic is using sacred symbols and the sacred geometry. We can see incantations. These were otherwise known as spells, right? Casting a spell is no different today as emitting energy, thought, feeling from higher vibration, which are affirmations or powerful intentions. And a lot of women, when they would go into these red tents, they would start journaling and using their affirmations. And when they would come together during the most intuitive time, during the feminine cycle, they would compile their journals and their sacred texts together. A lot of the Bibles were, a lot of these stories and were born. And unfortunately, it threatened a lot of the patriarchy, because these women were really becoming what they called goddesses, right? They were really activating their divine feminine nature, which you were referring to. And yet, because it disrupted the apple cart, these beautiful sacred texts have been removed from the Bible. Moreover, the feminine has been removed from society, making it a very patriarchal society, right? So we've removed woman, because it was the intuitive. It was the most natural way to activate our pineal gland, was using the feminine. And that's where, when we finally start to bridge the feminine with the masculine, we realize we're healing so much.
And so if the agenda to that point was to eradicate some of the feminine and to just make your life about material gain, and you're programmed of what you're to do, to be a slave, to work, and to do all these things, and not to be in tune with, so do erasing any natural, or there's no promoting of it or teachings like there was. So these teachings started being taken away. I mean, by the way, that's in every case. It's not just the feminine, it's ancient culture teachings. It's technology that indigenous cultures have been using with the sky, with the cosmology, with everything. So it's not just this feminine thing that we're trying to say, but we're talking for purposes of alchemical. Yes, the feminine, we've essentially erased some of the messenger mercurial ways of being, which would be more indigenous teachings of how to connect with your energy, how to. So, and that's why I think we both are on the same page of, we don't want even the most dogmatic religions taken away right now, because they're using to a certain extent so that people going there are. So for instance, over Christmas, I went to the Catholic sermon on Christmas Day. And the priest was talking about there is magic around the time of Christmas and New Year's and this time of year to go inward. He literally said what we had just talked about, our own deep meditation, which you had, and you can share some of the, connecting to I am, back to the intention and words.
Right.
Because energy trumps words, right? That's why Qigong, epigenetics, all of these things we talk about is over words, and then cleaning up our words too, right?
Because our words do evoke a specific energy.
Yeah.
Right?
When I contacted you and I was like, oh my gosh, we were going to do a podcast on magic and intentions, and I went and listened to sermon on Christmas, and it was about, literally he said, this is the time, and it used to be, and you used to feel it, and how you connect back to it is taking the time to participate in magic, is using the book of spells, and his book of spells was his Bible. And I'm just like, what the F, is anybody listening here? and I don't know, and I lean over and I'm like, can you believe, are you hearing the same thing I'm hearing, or am I hearing something distorted?
There's different levels of awareness.
No, he's talking, he just said book of spells, and what, and so we said, hey, that makes perfect sense. It was beautiful.
Yes.
And it was a way.
Right.